What I want to do now, and maybe for a couple weeks at least, is talk a bit about our church order. And today, I'm actually going to be talking, if I have time, about our classis meeting that we just had, and you know where that all fits in on who we are as a church. But every group of churches, whether you call it a denomination or a federation or a whatever, they have some sort of document that serves as kind of their, I don't know, constitution or something, right? Just to and generally those are called church orders, at least in our circles, or the Book of Church Order, these kind of things, and those are important. The Synod of Dort in 1618 and 19, they not only dealt with what we know as the canons of Dort, the tulip, the 5 points of Calvinism, so-called, but they also wrote a church order. And the United Reformed Church's church order is based on the Church Order of Dort. And so it's not obviously exact. In fact, it's not exact by any means, but it basically is a line. You can see the line from the Church Order of Dort to what we have. And our church order has 4 main sections to it. The first is the ecclesiastical offices. And then the second is ecclesiastical assemblies. The third is ecclesiastical functions and tasks. And then the fourth is ecclesiastical discipline. So that's those 4 parts. And when we talk about offices, the URC holds to a 3-office position. That means that we believe that there are 3 offices that that can be distinguished biblically. That would be the office of minister of the word, the office of elders, and of deacons. I do understand and will give a nod to our Presbyterian brothers who hold to a 2-office position. I would say that what they have done is they hold to a 3-office position. They just don't want to admit it. What I mean by that is they have the office of elder, but then they split it in 2, saying that there are ruling elders and then there are teaching elders. And we would simply say, well, the teaching elders we'll call ministers. So in practicality, it's really no different. We hold to the same thing. So I just like to nudge my Presbyterian brothers a little bit. All right. So we hold to a 3-office, and what the church order does is it basically lays out in regarding like the ministers, what are the duties of a minister, and then how does one prepare for the ministry? You know, there it says competent men should be urged to study for the ministry of the word. And a man who is a member of a church of the federation and aspires to the ministry must evidence genuine godliness to his consistory, which shall assume supervision of all aspects of his training, including his licensure to exhort, and assure that he receives a thoroughly reformed theological education. And the council of the church shall help him ensure that his financial needs are met. And so it talks about how these things take place in the church. And then there's the candidacy examination for one who aspires to the ministry. They need to go through a candidacy exam. Having completed that exam successfully, then his consistory will make an announcement to the entire federation that so-and-so is now declared a candidate for ministry. And then the churches may contact them. If a church is looking for a pastor, they might contact them, and then that's how these things happen. This is where I wanted to kind of bring in our classis meeting of this past week. Nick and I flew out last Monday to California, to Ontario, California, and there's an Ontario URC, and so we met there on Tuesday morning for classes, and from Tuesday it went till Wednesday after lunch, and this was the 51st meeting of the classes Southwest U.S. So since 1996 probably or so, anyway, the 51st meeting. And there were 13 pastors and 13 elders who were present as delegates, and that was for 13 churches of the classes, okay? 13 churches were represented. And one of the pastors, Reverend Daniel Ventura, was the chairman. One of the pastors of Ontario was the chairman of classes. So that's all done by rotation. Both who's going to sponsor the classes meeting, what church or what consistory is going to sponsor the classes meeting, and who's going to chair that meeting. Usually the chair is from the same church that sponsors, and that's all done by rotation. Okay, so that's not, it's not by volunteer or anything like that. There's a rotation of the 13 churches. Okay, so that's how that is done for classes, and at classes we receive reports, like the treasurer report, the stated clerk, he does. He does all the correspondence, kind of like between classes meetings. There's got to be a person that people can go to talk, and he's the one. And then he gives a report of the things that he has done. He also takes minutes of the classes meeting. In fact, what I'm working off of here is a report that he wrote. When the treasurer, by the way, gave his report, the classes agreed that we would keep the what we call askings the same. How many of you, were any of you in the CRC? I know the Nucleums were. But anyway, the CRC had what they call quotas, which they changed to ministry shares because quota sounded bad. But they changed it to ministry shares. But anyway, what that was basically churches were not, I would say asked, but not really asked. They were required to send in to the denomination a certain amount of money, and it would depend on the amount of people or amount of families in the church. Okay, so if you had 20 families, and that would mean you would pay whatever number it is times 20. That's what you would send to the denomination. The URC doesn't do that per se. We don't require it, so we don't call it quotas, but we call it askings. But other than that, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. So the point is, it does take money to do these kind of things, and so classes, we have a $20 family asking. So if our church has 25 families, at $20, that would mean we would send $500 to the classes annually, right? Something like that. And that would just so that classes can do its business, So that's what that is, and so that's one of the things we've done. We also at this classes meeting had video chats with Reverend Andrea Ferrari in Perugia, Italy, with Michael Brown in Milan, Italy, and Reverend Mihai Corse in Bucharest, Romania. So we planned it ahead of time, and they were prepared, and we were able to have a little bit of a conversation with them at the meeting, and we do that at every meeting of our classes. The bulk of the time, however, that we spent in classes was with a candidacy exam. And so I just read about candidacy examination, Article 4 of the Church Order. I didn't read it. Let me read that, and then we'll talk a little bit about this candidacy exam. At the conclusion of such training, a student must approach his consistory to become a candidate for ministry of the word, which shall arrange for his examination at a meeting of a classis of which his consistory is a participant. Okay, so we happen to get a lot of these, and the reason is because Westminster Seminary in California is in our classes. And so, and whenever these guys want to enter URC ministry, it happened, the exam happens in our classes. So we get, and we might say, an overabundance of these classical examinations. No one shall be declared a candidate for the ministry until he has sustained an examination at a meeting of this classis in the presence of his consistory, of his Christian faith and experience, of his call to the ministry. So these are the things he's examined. Of his Christian faith and experience, call to the ministry, of his knowledge of the Holy Scriptures, both in the original languages and in the English translations, of the three forms of unity, of Christian doctrine, of Christian ethics and church history, of the church order, and his knowledge and aptitude with regard to the particular duties and responsibilities of the ministry of the word, especially the preparation of preaching of sermons. Upon sustaining this exam in the presence of his consistory and with the concurring advice of the delegates of this meeting of classis, his consistory shall declare him a candidate for the office of minister of the word. And so that's what we were doing at this classis meeting. That was a big part of this classis meeting, was that situation where we had a candidate. The candidate's name was Andrew Admiral, and I would say that this was one of the best exams I'd ever heard from, and that's like after 30-some years of being in the ministry. This guy was impressive, and anyway, he passed with flying colors. I was one of the examiners. So there's like 7 different sections, which I kind of just read, and I did the one on ethics, and so I questioned him on the rights and wrongs, and anyway, as I said, he did very well. There were different overtures that came to us. An overture is a request from a consistory for either classes to deal with something or for classes to bring to synod to deal with something. Okay? So we had, and one of them was an interesting one. It was basically taking the church order and sort of giving it internal logic or consistency. So sometimes, what happens is, you have the church order, and then there's a change made to the church order. A church brings an overture, changing this particular section or this particular article, and that change is made. It's all good, that it all goes through the process. But then one of the words don't quite fit with something else in this part of the church order, and so there's a lack of consistency. And for instance, one might say, this church shall call the classis meeting. Well, the correct way would be the consistory will call the classis meeting. The church doesn't. It's actually the consistory that does. And so it's sort of editorially. That's what we were dealing with, and there was a lot that we were doing with that. But anyway, that was one of the overtures, is just to clean up some of those kind of things, making it sharper, better. Nothing of substantial meaning differences, right? Just getting internal consistency, cleaning it up is what that was. And so that passed with some amendments. It passed. One of the interesting things that came up at this classis was an overture to that classis Southwest U.S. Have a needy church fund and appoint a committee to sort of work on that. So this would be different than a church plant fund, which we already have. Our classis has a church planting fund, where we can give money into that fund, and then classes distributes it to church plants that are happening within our classes. That makes sense? This is for established churches that are needy, okay? So not church plants, but those that are already, we would typically use the term organized, and those churches that have been organized, no longer in a church plant category, they've been organized as their own church. They're not under another church, in other words, but they have financial problems, or financial needs, and so the overture was to start a needy church fund and to appoint a committee to sort of oversee it. Initially, that we appointed that we did approve it. We did approve a needy church fund, and we did approve appointing a committee. And ultimately, we're asking that committee to come with sort of the practice. How are we going to do this? Come with a mandate. What's this committee going to do? Who may apply to the fund? Those kind of situations, and how is that all going to take place? So that all needs to be laid out, and that committee was appointed. Nick is on that committee. So Nick volunteered to serve on that committee, and he was appointed to do so. So that's going to be very interesting. One of the church that brought that forward is actually the Ontario URC church, where we had classes, and they actually have needs as a church, financial needs. And so we're going to probably be talking about that a bit, because one of their pastors is going to be filling the pulpit in November for me, and so we're going to be as a council talking about if there are ways that we can help that needy church, because the fund, it doesn't exist yet, so they can't tap into a fund that doesn't exist yet, and so can in the meantime, before that happens, can there be some help? And we're hoping that we as a church can help them with that. Other than that, there were churches brought issues regarding discipline matters and seeking advice regarding discipline, and that pretty much was what the classes was. Just to let you know. Any questions about that? Is that helpful? What happens at classes meetings? That's good. I'm hoping. For me, it's like old hats, but for you guys, you've probably never seen one before. You don't know what's happening, and so yeah, Stephen.
The needy church fund, was that overture to actually establish the fund, or was it to establish a study committee?
It was actually to establish a fund, and so there were three overtures that they brought. One was to establish the fund. One was to appoint a committee to oversee it and to work it, and the other one was we're Ontario URC and we need help. So we'd like to tap into that fund, and that one was actually found out of order. That's not really an overture; it's a request for financial help, and so from a church order point of view, that's why it was out of order. It wasn't out of order. Churches shouldn't let these things be known. So try to clarify that. We do want to help them, yes.
How often do you meet for classes?
Twice a year, September and March. Yeah.
How do you determine things are out of order? Do you have a file in the bills?
Well, we have the church order. We have also what's it called? Rules of procedure, classical rules of procedure. So, which follows loosely Robert's Rules of Order, with a little bit some differences, but yeah, so we can definitely determine that using those rules of procedure. There's synodical rules of procedure as well, which are close to classical rules of procedure. Yeah.
Is there a moderator then who sort of
The chair of the classes does that, yeah. And then you can always challenge the chair, you know, as just typical, if you think he made a wrong decision. You know, any delegate can challenge the chair. So yeah. Yeah. Okay, then we'll stop right there.